Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Hitting the Hardwood podcast, your home for all the latest Minnesota Lynx and WNBA news, analysis, and coverage. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I'm your host, Mitchell Hansen, and we're already at the midway point of the first half of the WNBA season. We're a little over a quarter of the way through the season, but we're officially over a month into the regular season. We're about a month away from the WNBA Olympic break, when they take about a month plus off during the Olympics here this summer. And it's kind of flown by already, which it seems like it always does. Once the games get going, they seem to come fast and furious, and before we know it, we're either at the halfway point or nearing the end of the regular season. But this year will be a little bit different. We get that break in between, and we kind of get a break from the WNBA action, get to shift our focus to the Olympics before we get into the second half of the season, which will be really interesting to see how teams kind of bounce out or kind of rebound or kind of come out of the Olympic break, whether they continue the hot streaks that they're on, such as the Minnesota Lynx, or if teams are able to get healthy, turn things around, let's say like the Dallas Wings. So it'll be interesting to see how teams look in the second half of the year, especially with that month-long break, and especially with the players who aren't playing overseas, what they do to kind of keep their bodies ready, keep their bodies in shape. So when the games get going again after that break, they're ready to hit the ground running. But with that said, I'm really excited about the guest this week. It's a friend of the podcast, somebody who's been on the podcast quite a bit, somebody who I'm lucky to call a great friend. He's a great writer, great reporter, Jack Borman, who I have had the pleasure of working with over the years last few years at Canis Hoopus. Like I said, he's become a great friend of mine, and he's very talented and is great at what he does, and he's a great basketball mind, and I'm lucky to have him on the podcast this week. We talk about really everything from we kind of go into a deep dive on the Lynx. We really talk about everything from what we've seen so far. We kind of look at the roster, the different pieces that have thrived for the Lynx, what they're doing well as a team, and then we also kind of look ahead to the rest of the season. And expectations for the Lynx moving forward. And just a note, we did record this before Minnesota's win over Atlanta on Wednesday. So that is just a note. It was in between the Dallas game and the Atlanta game on Wednesday, and before the weekend games here this past weekend as you're listening to the podcast here this week. So just a note on that. It is a few games back, but it still does kind of grasp what we've seen from the Lynx so far. And what's to come for Minnesota. So without further ado, let's jump right into the podcast with Jack Borman. Jack Borman, how are you doing, man?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. It's been a while. Last year was, well, we did some stuff this off season, I guess, but last year you're kind of a regular guest, and we haven't had you on yet this year. So I appreciate you joining.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate the call from the bullpen here.
Yeah. Always the trusty left-hander out of the bullpen. So I appreciate that. Well, first of all, it's what it's hard to believe we're already more than a quarter of the way through the regular season. We're already a month plus into the regular season, about a month away from the Olympic break, so kind of that midway point. What started off as kind of maybe an early season, you could say maybe surprise. I know they won't say it internally that it was a surprise, but maybe an early season surprise for the Minnesota Lynx has turned into a trend here a quarter of the way through the year. I guess just for starters, what are your early predictions, or not early predictions, early thoughts on what's taken place so far for the Lynx?
Yeah, I think it's nice to see what the idea was become the reality, right? I think when you pick up free agents like Alana Smith and Courtney Williams, and you think about obviously that they played together last year with the Sky, but you think that okay, these pieces might fit better in the starting lineup than what the Lynx had last season. When you think about the way that Courtney Williams is able to break defenders down off the dribble and drive into the paint and create her own scoring opportunities, has been huge for the offense, just to take some pressure off of Napheesa Collier and Kayla McBride. And then you think about the way that Alana Smith, especially her athleticism in the open court, and then as a cutter too, has really been a weapon for the Lynx. And then you think about the way that again, her athleticism and her length and her timing and her defensive playmaking has really meshed well with Napheesa Collier. I think that's kind of where it all starts when you think about the two biggest changes that they've had this season, and I think how seamlessly those two have fit into this starting lineup. have really kind of mitigated the loss of Diamond Miller, which obviously has been really unfortunate, just because I was really excited to see Diamond play, especially defensively. I think, we all know what she's capable of doing offensively, but I think, her being able to take the challenge of guarding some of the other team's best perimeter players and take some pressure off of Kayla McBride on the defensive end of the floor was something that I was really looking forward to seeing, just because Diamond has all the makeup athletically and,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that she's wired to be just a stud defender. And I was, hopefully we're able to see that after the Olympic break if she's able to return. But yeah, so I think it starts there. And then, when you think about how much deeper this team is, right? This Lynx team really struggled to score consistently off of the bench last season. In the way that you've got Chechi Sandalissini coming back to the Lynx and really just hitting the ground running, especially as a 3-point shooter, I think has been tremendous for this Lynx team. And when you think about the fact that you have a rookie in Alyssa Peely, but you haven't necessarily needed to play her all that much offensively, because Chechi has been shooting 46% from three, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're just able to balance some of that production out, right? When you think about now that the fact they have Dorka Juhas back, Dorka's been phenomenal. Since she returned, she was terrific, and in the team's most recent win over Dallas, starting for Bridget Carlton, who has been phenomenal as well, and starting in place of Diamond Miller. I think when you look at Bridget and you see that her 3-point volume is finally up, she's shooting 5 threes a game, she's shooting nearly 43%. I think it's the arm sleeve personally. That's what I think you can attribute all of it to, now that she's gotten on board with Fee and K-Mac and that left arm sleeve. I think she would probably tell you the same thing. But when you talk to Cheryl or you talk to GM Claire Duilius, I think that, they would both tell you, we really want to see BC play more like the Team Canada version of Bridget Carlton, where she just has no conscience. She's just super fearless offensively, and she's just willing to let it rip from all over the floor. And that's what we've seen this season. And she's played super confidently offensively. And I think she's got exactly the offensive makeup that you want from a player that can fit into this 5-out, space the floor, get a bunch of threes up offense that the Lynx have played so far this season. And and I think every single player that I've mentioned is someone that's able to stretch the floor and shoot the three, and has done so at a really good rate for the Lynx this season. I mean, of all the players that are in the rotation for the most part, Fee is the second worst 3-point shooter in the rotation. And we obviously know that she's a better 3-point shooter than shooting 30.4% so far this season. So, I just am really excited to see whether the Lynx can keep up the two most important parts of their offensive profile, which is their assist percentage, right? They have by far the highest assist percentage in the league at 78.7%. Next highest is 74, and that's more than the gap between second and fourth. So, or excuse me, second and fifth. So they're way out in front of the league in that. And then when you look at just their raw 3-point shooting totals, right? I mean, they're shooting 40.5% from three, and the next highest team is at 34.5%, which is bigger than the gap between the number 2 team and the team in dead last, Dallas, at 28.8%. So they've just been lapping the field in their ability to shoot threes. I mean, we both knew that the Lynx were going to try to shoot more threes. That was what they wanted to do. That was kind of the North Star that was guiding their entire offseason, roster buildup or roster shakeup plan, if you will. And to see that, I guess the thought, the idea become the reality that it has. I mean, you can't really ignore a 14-game sample. You're looking at 40% of the season. So it's been a ton of fun to see them, kind of adopt this offensive identity and really thrive in it, because I think they're still a team that's a little bit undersized, and the way that they've been able to make up for it by spreading teams out and shooting the three and winning with defense, or excuse me, winning with offense for the most part. If I would have told you a year ago that this Lynx team this coming season would find a way to win with offense rather consistently, I think that you would have been pretty surprised. I mean, they have the number 2 defense, but I think we'd both probably agree that their offense has been what's driving a lot of their success so far. And the defense has just kind of been a nice cherry on top of that. There haven't been too many games where it just really feels like the Lynx have just overwhelmed their opponent with defense, but we've seen them overwhelm opponents with 3-point shooting, on nights when maybe the other team has been scoring with him, but
Hmm.
the 3-point equation has just been the ultimate weapon for them.
Yeah.
That's really helped them win games so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing that you kind of talked about the 3-point shooting. I mean that's something they were very clear. Cheryl Reeve was very clear at the beginning of the year. That's what she wanted to see them improve. Not only just the amount of shots that they're making, but the shots amount that they're taking. She came into the season saying she wanted to be top four in that area, and they're certainly top four. But the thing that is kind of surprised me a little bit, or kind of has been impressive to me, rather, is the amount of depth on this team. Like it is crazy how deep this team is. You have, you mentioned two players, Dorka Juhas and Bridget Carlton. They could be starting. Bridget Carlton is starting, and now, granted, that is because Diamond Miller is out, but we saw Dorka Juhas step in when Bridget was out. Those are two capable players of stepping up and starting on a team. And then you have the other options. You mentioned Chechi coming off the bench. You even have Olivia. I'm going to butcher her last name, but Ollie coming off the bench. That has provided some big minutes in certain situations, and especially down the stretch. I mean, you have Alyssa Peely, like you mentioned, that could come off the bench. This team. Cheryl talked at the end of last year of them not being able to have a third option. They had K-Mac, they had Fee as their one and two, but when they're struggling or when they get shut down, they don't have another option to step in. I wouldn't say that they necessarily have that clear-cut number three option right now, but they have a 3, 4, 5, and 6, which certainly helps and that makes up for it. So just the moves that were made this offseason are just fitting into this team perfectly, not only personality-wise, but skill set-wise. And that's obviously transitioned or translated onto the court, and it'll only, I think, improve once Diamond Miller finally gets back and gets healthy, and this team is back at full strength. But they're clicking on all cylinders right now. It's very impressive. We're
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, yeah, I think the good thing about having a 3-4-5-6 that is oftentimes better than your opponent's 3-4-5-6 is that even if you don't have a clear cut number three, I mean, we've seen Alana Smith be that number three. We've seen Courtney
Yep.
Williams be that number three. We've seen Dorka. We've seen Natisha Heidemann. We've seen Chechi. So
Hmm.
it's the fact that anyone is capable of doing it, and the fact that they've all proven in one game or another this season that they can be that third option, or that they can be that fourth option, has been really important, just because I think it gives them all confidence. And I think that it would, I think that it's really cool when you just, any night could be anyone's night.
Hmm.
And I think the way, or how connected this team is, I think really promotes that, in that if someone's down or someone's in foul trouble, they all believe in each other so staunchly. And this coaching staff, I think, believes in all of them so staunchly that there's no hesitation, or there's no, oh, well, I don't want to take shots away from someone else, or I don't know if I should be playing this free. I don't know if I should, feel confident enough to take this many shots offensively. It's just everybody's got the green light. And I think everybody knows what the role is so nicely. And when someone's out,
Hmm.
they know exactly what they need to do in filling in for the person that they're filling in for. I mean, look at Dorka last night. Dorka played the three at
Hmm.
moments last night and played pretty damn well.
Yeah.
And I think, it just speaks to how interchangeable the pieces on this team are, because of how connected they are, and how much they all understand the identity of this team, and how Cheryl Reeve wants them to play. And I think, I personally think the coach of the year should be the coach that does the best coaching job, not necessarily the team that finishes with the best record.
Hmm.
And I certainly think that the Lynx have the front runner for both coach of the year and executive of the year.
Hmm.
When you look at how different this team is from last season, but you also look at how this team is playing relative to their expectations. I don't think there's anyone who is playing better than what was expected of them coming into the season, whether that was what the team expected or what
Right.
outsiders expected. I don't think the Lynx probably expected to be the very clear cut third best team in the league, or fourth
Hmm.
best team in the league. I think that was certainly something that they wouldn't have been surprised by, but expectation, I don't know if that would be their expectation. So nonetheless, it's been incredible to see. And I think the best part about this, and what Lynx fans should be most excited about, is that it feels sustainable. I don't think there's any part of this uh, that really feels like it's just kind of a flash in the pan, or something that can't last. Kayla McBride may not shoot 49.5% from three for the rest of the season, but I think as a team, they absolutely should be able to consider or continue to be the number one shooting 3-point team in the WNBA. And I still think that you could see Alana Smith and Bridget Carlton, and Dorka Juhas continue to shoot at these, and Kayla McBride continue to shoot at these career high clips from beyond the arc, right? Because the quality of shots they're getting is really high. Their confidence is there, and their form is much improved from what it was last season. So, it's been fun to watch.
Yeah, and not only are they winning, I mean, obviously they're off to their best start since 2017, when obviously they won the WNBA championship that year. But the way that they're winning these games too, they're struggling at points in games, and they're still coming out on top in the end. They're stepping up late in games, which is not what we saw at in points in the last couple of years. I mean, it's impressive to see that they, I even look at the win over Dallas. Like, they struggled a decent amount, in that first half. Nafisa Collier was struggling, Courtney Williams was struggling, and they just kept at it, and they just kept to what they do well. They kept doing what they know they do well, even if they are struggling. They just kept at it, and it ends up working out in the end. But the way that they're winning, the way that they're stepping up late in games, how they're winning games when they are dominating or struggling, whatever it may be. And they're also winning their home games. That's a very impressive. Well, it's an important thing. You want to win. That Cheryl Rivas talked about this, at length over the last, I don't know how many years, that you have to take care of business on your home court. And last year they were below 500 in that area. This year they're 7-1 in that area. And that's impressive too, and that's very important, because that when you look back on the year and you're below 500, or you're maybe floating around 500 at home, that's not great, and that oftentimes leads to being in the bottom half of the standings. But they're doing a great job at home too.
Yeah, and I think too, what speaks to, I think, like you talked about, that may not be perfect throughout the whole game, but they figure it out. And I think the mark of great teams is, if you go back, and it doesn't matter whether it's the NBA or the WNBA, if you go and look at all the recent champions in the last 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it is, and you go look at where all those teams rank in the third quarter, a lot of times the best teams are right up there in the top 2 or the top 3 in third quarter net rating. And the Lynx right now are plus 19.6, which is an astronomically,
that's insane,
amazing number. It's number 2 in the league behind Connecticut. But when you think about that they're 20 points per 100 possessions better than their opponent in the third quarter, it goes to show that, like, there are no egos on this team, and that if somebody isn't having a good game and needs to be someone needs to kind of tear into them at halftime, or they need to make changes and hold each other accountable to to kind of band together and kind of remake what they're doing on the fly in the second half. That's been awesome. Where they've been able to do that at an awesome level so far this season. I mean, and then they're the best second half team in the WNBA by net rating at just under plus 15. And I think those are all things that you'd love to see. The Lynx haven't played in a ton of games that have gone right down to the wire necessarily. I mean, you think about the double OT game versus Seattle, you think about and then you think about the game against Phoenix, right? And then you have the game against Connecticut. But outside of those, there haven't been a ton of games that have just been super, super close. And so that's something I think that you're kind of going to see maybe come up more, and you'd like to see a little bit more of as you get closer to the playoffs, just because I think there are some other teams in the league that have some more experience playing in the clutch. But yeah, I think overall it's still a really good thing to see the Lynx playing as well as they have, in those third and fourth quarters. I think, and I'm just looking at it now. When you look at clutch games, the Lynx are played in the fewest amount of games that qualify as clutch games. So that's the game is within 5 points with under 5 minutes left. So, but again, like you can't be mad that the Lynx haven't played in clutch games, because they're winning all these games by 10 plus. And a lot of times these fourth quarters have mostly just been, the ribbon on, just kind of
right,
carrying out what's already been decided.
I know that at the beginning it might have been, well, it was before the year started. I don't remember if we talked about it on the podcast, but I know we had the conversations maybe off the podcast of the expectations for this team. And we both had talked about how this is a top four team, yeah, just based on the moves that they made. Now, I admittedly am surprised with how fast they have started because I expected this type of team maybe midway through the season, maybe in the third, two-thirds of the way through the season, whatever it may be. But I didn't expect it right out of the gate. Are you kind of surprised with I guess how fast this team has kind of gelled together, how fast they've built that chemistry and I guess how strong they've started right away?
Yeah, I don't think that um I don't think it's certainly what most people expected.
Hmm.
No question, but I don't think that I'm surprised by how fast they've started just because I think when when you consider how good Fee was last year and you think about okay, now there's even more space that she can operate in and you think about, Kayla coming off a terrific year playing overseas, BC came off an awesome season. Um, Playing overseas. Dorka, this was the first time that Dorka was really able to go overseas and kind of be more of an offensive focal point. Whereas I think, she was just kind of finding her bearings, if you will, in the WNBA last season. And to her credit, she matured and grew really well over the course of her rookie season. I think you're just kind of getting a confluence of all these players kind of finding their groove and their rhythm and their confidence at the right time mixed with getting players that fit. And I think when you get all those things and you have really good leaders, I think the Lynx have two awesome leaders who are really really well respected within that building,
Hmm.
and walk the walk on the court too, which is really important with Fee and Kayla McBride. I'm not super surprised, and I think a lot of teams say that they really go out and try to find the best people and make sure that players are fits not only on the court as players with what they bring to the table, but also in the locker room and in practice. And we heard the Lynx talk about all season about why last year they felt that they maybe even punched above their weight last season because of how connected that team was. And now you're able to still bring the same quality of people that they had on the team last season, but now you add in players who fit a little bit better with this roster and maybe are a little bit more talented and versatile and what they're able to do on the floor. And you know, when all that stuff comes together, it doesn't necessarily shock me that this team is playing as well as it is, right?
Hmm.
And um, and it helps too. I think that some of the pieces and players that they brought in, aren't necessarily superstars, right? I think you've seen some other teams that have had bigger names come in that are more important. I don't want to say more important, but um, I guess higher usage players on either end of the floor that take longer to kind of integrate into what you're doing. It's no surprise to me that the Lynx have kind of gelled faster than a Seattle or a Phoenix that brought in superstars in the offseason. Does
Hmm.
that kind of land with you?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think that, and this kind of feeds into my next point or next topic I wanted to talk about, but just the additions that they did add like I mentioned earlier, they just fit this team so well. And I know it didn't wow people that they signed Alana Smith and Courtney Williams and Natisha Heidemann. I guess they traded for Natisha Heidemann, but you get the new additions they did bring in. Those names don't wow people, but they are wowing people now because they realize how great they fit together, and how great this team has gelled, and it's a credit to Cheryl Reeve has always talked about not only wanting to bring in good players but good people, and all three of those players check that box. They're great teammates, they're great people, and that goes a long way. That almost goes sometimes farther than what they're able to do on the court because that's a a credit or a kind of a that has resulted in the chemistry that has been built. And so I think that they've not only thrived on the court, but they've been great fits off. And I you hear Kayla McBride talk about it, you hear Bridget Carlton talk about it, Tisha Heidemann, Courtney Williams, even Alana Smith after the win over Dallas, that that this team just gets along so well. And K-Mac even talked about it too, specifically when it comes to defense. she's like, some of the best defensive teams I've been on, we don't, it's not that we're, great on the court, but we're even closer off of the court. And that's this team to a T. And that's it has fed into success on both ends of the court. Like I've said in the past, like this team seems like they've been playing together for a year already, and they've been playing together for a month. And so it's crazy to think about what this team has kind of evolved into so quickly, and also thinking ahead to what they could bring or what they could do, because once they get fully healthy, once they get more familiar with each other, this team's only going to get even better, and at least not drop off or not drop. So this team is a legit, top three team, top four team in this league, and it's been an impressive season so far. And I guess, kind of going back to those three additions that I did mention, and you could even, I'm not considering Alyssa Peely just because she's played a limited amount so far this year. It's kind of hard to judge or kind of, judge her off of that quality or that, amount of play so far. But what do you think about the three additions that they did bring in, that being Alana Smith, Courtney Williams, and Tisha Heidemann, and how, not necessarily how, I mean, you could add this in there, but how they fit, but what they've been able to do on the court?
Yeah, I think that I was personally the highest on Alana Smith coming in, just because I'd seen a lot of Chicago last year,
Mhm. You text me right
thought that
after.
and I maintain that
Yeah.
from when they signed. I thought that she was really going to take a step forward with a larger role here, and that's exactly what's happened. I just thought that the way that she would, I just thought she was more of a two-way player than Courtney Williams would. And I worried a little bit that if Courtney's shot wasn't falling, that that her, her offensive impact wouldn't be quite as great. But I was wrong there, because her playmaking has been phenomenal for the most part when she's taking care of the ball. But for Atlanta, I just think, we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years of her career, her 3-point percentage increased by about 5% every single year. And now this year it's increased by almost 15% from last year. But yeah, I just think the way that she fits into, the Lynx really like to have their bigs play on the perimeter and play more of an inverted style in the half court, and have their bigs involved in the handoff game, set a ton of screens, and kind of mix up the way that they're interacting with guards, whether it be picking and popping or picking and rolling, or kind of playing in the handoff game. And she's been so good at deciding, when to hand it off, when to fake it, when to just take it herself, and and drive to the basket. And when she's been off the ball, when to cut back door off of players too. I think the way that she just keeps defenses on its toes has been awesome. And then defensively, we've all seen the way that she's been able to block shots and use her length and get in the passing lanes. We had a game where I think her and Fee each had 8 stocks in a game, which I don't know that that's ever happened in a WNBA game. So it's been really cool to see the way that those two feed off of each other defensively. Um, I think I've been a little disappointed, frankly, with Natisha Heidemann, in that I thought she was going to bring a little bit more to the table offensively, especially as a shooter. And I know that there's still plenty of time for her to turn it around, and she hasn't shot all that many threes when you think about, but she is shooting 23%, and that's something that's significantly lower than what she shot over the course of her career. And I do think she's been a really steady hand as a playmaker. Has an assist to turnover ratio north of 2, which is obviously what you want from a backup guard. And to her credit, the second unit has played really, really well together, in large part because of the way that she's been able to get things organized. So I guess the only aspect of her game, I should say, that I've been disappointed with a little bit has been her 3-point shooting, just because that was something that I was really fired up about. Because when you lose Rachel Banham, who obviously was a terrific 3-point shooter and could score and pick and roll, you'd hope that Natisha Heidemann would be able to backfill some of those things, and she hasn't been able to backfill those things quite as well as I thought she might. But I do think that she's been an upgrade in the playmaking department, and her athleticism is clearly a step above what the Lynx had in Lindsay Allen and Rachel Banham last season as well. And she's been really active too, and a competitive on-ball defender, which is what you want. And and for Courtney Williams, I just think, again, like, there's just been too many games where she's been almost a non-factor as a scorer, and has had some of these kind of gaudy, 2 for 10, 3 for 12 shooting games that, I think that look a little bit tougher when you're taking a ton of long range or long contested twos. It just blows my mind that like the Lynx can't get her to just take more threes, stop stepping a foot inside the line. It really does not make that much of a difference. Like a foot inside the line 2-point shot, I don't care if you're wide open. That's a terrible shot. It should be a 3-point shot, or you should get closer to the rim if you're really that wide open. But I just think that her spirit and her fire and the way that she plays just infuses so much energy in her teammates. And when she does have it rolling, which has been more often than not for the most part this season, it is really contagious and infectious. And I think that that's something that the Lynx really need as well. And and Seawill's been a huge part of, I think, just the way that this team's been able to click and connect on the offensive end of the floor. Just because she has been a willing passer, and she's been for the large part a really solid pick and roll playmaker, and has done a good job of getting the ball to Alana Smith and Nafisa Collier down in the paint. Again, like I think if Courtney Williams can just be a little bit more consistent as a scorer. Right now she's scoring about 10.5 points a game. I think they can get her closer to 12 or 13, where she can really be I think she should be the number 3 scorer, not Alana Smith. And that's not a slight to Alana whatsoever. It's just that like Courtney Williams is a professional scorer. Like her scoring, skill set is so good and so unique, and something that was so highly touted coming into this season. And I think if they can just tap into it a little bit more, find ways to get her some easier shots, especially on nights when she's struggling. And so we can just raise kind of the floor of her offensive scoring a little bit. I think the Lynx are going to be even better than they are right now. And they're already playing, phenomenally well. And I think all 3 of the players that we mentioned here have played a huge role in it. And and I think there's certainly some areas that they need to improve. Heidemann, I think 3-point shooting. I think Courtney Williams just taking a little bit better shots and finding ways to get easier offense. And then Alana Smith, I think, if she can find ways to cut down on her turnovers and her fouls, I think that would be, that would be huge for this team moving forward, just because they need Alana Smith to stay on the floor. And there's certainly been some games where the fouling has been somewhat problematic. So, but again, overall as a free agency class, bringing in 3 new players and how, heavily they've been relied upon so far this season, I don't think you can really say anything other than it's been a pretty rousing success so far for the Lynx.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. That great points there. Looking at the standings, Minnesota is obviously in 3rd place. They're sitting behind Connecticut and New York, who have looked really impressive. You have teams behind them that are going to pick up steam. I mean, we've seen Seattle already kind of turn things around a little bit compared to when the Lynx saw them early in the year, as they kind of work in their new pieces. Phoenix, now that they have Brittany Griner back fully healthy and back into the lineup, they're going to only continue to, I think, continue to improve with some new pieces as well. Las Vegas is going to end up figuring things out. It's just once they get Chelsea Gray back, it's just kind of inevitable that they're going to end up figuring things out. When you look at kind of the breakdown of the league and how teams have done so far, obviously Minnesota's right up there. Do you consider that, and now granted we're only, a little over a quarter of the way through the season, kind of inching closer to that halfway mark, but when you look at this Minnesota team, do you consider them serious contenders for the WNBA title this year? I know it's an early kind of evaluation, but
I, I think there's a very clearly defined tier 1 that is Vegas and New York. And I think there is a very defined clear tier 2 that has Connecticut and Minnesota in there. And I think, so I think that, if an injury takes place or something like that, like they absolutely could be right there. But I just fully expect Vegas to figure it out, just because they're so talented. I do think their depth is a significant issue, though. Even when Chelsea Gray comes back, I do think that if anyone in their rotation gets in foul trouble or gets hurt, God forbid, that it's just going to be tough for them to backfill that. And we've certainly seen that so far this season. So I'd say that they're serious contenders, because I think they'll advance out of the first round. And I feel great about that happening. I think that, they certainly could could find themselves in a situation where, they have home court advantage for a second round series as well, depending on who they may play, and with how good they've been at home, that we surely could see them in the final. So yeah, I'd say by that measure, yeah, it's hard to say that they're not serious contenders at this point, given what we've seen from them. And then they did beat New York when New York, I'm pretty sure had everybody playing in that game.
Yeah,
I think that was before Sloot, left the team for personal reasons. But yeah, it'll be really exciting to kind of see what the Lynx look like when they play Connecticut and New York and Las Vegas, once kind of all those teams are fully constituted again. And they should have beaten Connecticut if they didn't get, kind of screwed by that horrendous fee call at the end of the game. So yeah, I think again, they've beaten every team in the league just about so far, and all the times that I don't think there's anybody that they've played that they haven't beat so far this season, right? Am I right by that?
I believe
Maybe
so.
Connecticut.
Yes.
Maybe
Oh,
Connecticut
you're
is
right.
the one team that they've played and they haven't beat so far. But because I don't think have they played Washington yet?
No.
I think they played Washington in the preseason, but not in the regular season.
Right.
So,
Yep.
And they haven't played Indiana yet either.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's obviously a good measure, I think. Yeah, it's hard for me to sit here and say, pound my fist on the table and say, no, they're not.
Right.
So a soft yes.
I definitely agree with you. It's different when they're playing like they are in the second half of the year. Let's say that, because obviously teams are better in the second half of the year. It'll be very telling to see how they do out of the Olympic break, because that'll be an interesting period too, coming out of the break. You have that month-long break. Some players are playing in the Olympics. You got to kind of take that into account on how they're doing fatigue-wise and just kind of being run down. But if they are able to come out of that break, kind of back to this form that we're seeing them right now, it's definitely a team that I agree with you that, I believe that New York and Las Vegas are at the top, but I believe this Minnesota Lynx team is a team that could definitely go on a run. And the part that, kind of pushes me over the edge on that is just A, how strong they are defensively, and B, their depth. It's just, their depth is just, that comes into account late in the season and in the postseason, and I think Minnesota has kind of set themselves up for success in the long run. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see what ends up taking place, and how the second half of the year unfolds, because that'll be, like I said, that'll be very telling to see kind of where this team is at, and that'll be a good measuring stick to kind of push me over the edge. It's a soft yes for me too, but I could be convinced either way, but it's this team has been
and you
very
need
impressive.
You need a megastar, right?
Yes.
You need a megastar if you're going to compete for a title in the WNBA. And the great thing is that the Lynx certainly have one. And
Yes.
and through fee, anything is possible.
Yes. Yeah. She is unbelievable. Every night it seems like she does something else. It's just like, really? Did she just do that? And yeah.
And then even on the game she's not, it's like she still ends up having like 14 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 blocks, and 4 steals. And it's like,
yeah, I said she
right.
struggled against Dallas and she ended up with like 17, 8, and 3 or 4 or something like that. And it's like, okay, that's still a good game, but yeah, she's something else. But well, Jack, I really appreciate you joining. We'll definitely have to get in touch or kind of regroup here on the podcast here as the season goes along. And as always, I appreciate you hopping on and taking some time to join me.
Absolutely. Always great to be with you, my man.
All right. We'll talk soon. Thank you once again to Jack for joining the podcast this week. As I mentioned, Jack is phenomenal. I could probably record a podcast for him or with him for hours, and we could just keep going on and on and on. But it's great talking basketball with Jack. It's great talking to Jack in general. Like I said, he's become kind of somebody that I've worked alongside, but he's also become a friend of mine. And like I said, he does great work. Very talented at what he does, and the sky's the limit for that guy. So I appreciate Jack for all he does for covering the game, and for joining the podcast once again. I also want to give a shout out to Jeremy Rushing for producing this podcast, as I do every week. Jeremy does a great job in the back end of producing this podcast, getting it out to you guys in a timely manner. And he's a great partner with me here at Hitting the Hardwood. So I appreciate Jeremy and all that he does. I also want to, before we jump into our sponsors as we do every week, I want to point out our Patreon page, patreon.com/Hitting the Hardwood. That's where you'll find a lot of exclusive content. You'll get a lot of information that you won't get anywhere else. You'll get early access to information such as this podcast, our power rankings every week. You'll get a weekly newsletter, and much more. So please go check that out. Give it a try. Give it a free trial if you wish. And then if you could consider potentially, it's for a limited amount each month, providing a little bit of a kickback to our Patreon page, so you can support Hitting the Hardwood and ensure the longevity of this podcast. I would really appreciate anything that you can do. With that said, I want to give a shout out to our two partners, as I mentioned, Better Edge and Homage. As I do every week, those two have been here been with us since day one. Since we started this over, which is hard to believe, a year and a half ago. So I really appreciate those two outlets and what they're able to do. Check out betteredge.com, bettor-edge.com, and check out Homage, HOMAGE.com. And you can find all of that information on our website. Go to our social medias. You'll find that in our bios. You'll find the links to our website. You can find out more information about this podcast, our newsletter, as I mentioned, our Patreon page, as well as our sponsors and our partners here at Hitting the Hardwood. So with that said, we're going to continue on here with this first half of the regular season. Like I said, we're already at the midway point of the first half, which is crazy. The Lynx are right up there. They're right up at top 3 team in the WNBA. Entering the weekend's games this past weekend, they were tied with New York Liberty for second in the WNBA standings. So they're off to a hot start, and I think it'll continue from here. This team looks really impressive. It's probably one of the more talented teams since they last won the title in 2017. And that was obviously a year to remember with them winning the title, as I mentioned. So great year so far. Looking forward to the rest of the first half of the regular season, as well as the rest of the regular season in its entirety. We do have the Commissioner's Cup game coming up, which will be interesting to see how Minnesota can match up against New York, having played them already once this year. They get another look at New York now a little bit later on in the season, so that'll be very interesting to see take place. And it'll also be interesting to see if this team can continue to play as well as they have, because they really have been playing well, and that's an understatement. So it's been a fun year so far. Let's keep it going. I appreciate you guys all for listening. I really enjoy bringing this podcast to you here a couple times a month. I'm going to continue to do that throughout the regular season, so I appreciate you all for tuning in. Feel free to share, like, subscribe, and pass this podcast along to anybody that you think would enjoy it. So once again, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you guys next time.
3, 2,